Good afternoon and welcome to today's event, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Implementing Infrastructure Investments at the Local Level. My name is Tim Horak. I'm a marketing director here at Eagleview, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. We have a full agenda, like most calls, and want to leave time for questions, but we need to begin with a few housekeeping items to ensure that everyone has a positive experience on today's call. So first, everything on your screen is customizable, meaning you can reposition and resize all of the boxes to your liking. If you're not seeing any of the widgets that I mentioned, press Control and the minus sign to sort of zoom out. They may be off of your screen depending on whether you're on your phone, a laptop, or a desktop. So directly under the media player where you're seeing me is the Ask a Question box. If you have questions throughout the event, please submit and we'll work to address those questions during or at the end of the call. And if we don't get to them, we will respond via email afterwards. Under the Ask a Question box, you'll see a box called Related Content. These are several resources that we will reference throughout the call, including links to Eagleview and NACO content. Feel free to explore those, especially the bill funding notices and the asset management submission page. I want to spend just a moment here in advance the slide quickly to show you what I mean. I kind of recommend opening both of the NACO bill tables. One shows all of the funding opportunities associated with the legislation, and the other shows the notices that are currently open and taking applications for funding. It may behoove you to just have those open throughout the call, explore those so that if you have any questions about either the full program or any of the open notices, that you can just ask those questions to us while we're here on the call. On the right side of your screen, you'll see a box that says Request a Demo. If you're interested in learning more about Eagleview solutions, setting up a demo or a conversation, or just want someone to contact you and help you navigate bill funding opportunities, you can fill out the form at that link and your district manager will contact. I just showed are available as links off of that page, but it's consistently updated with NACO's content, and I highly recommend just keeping quick access to that so you can keep up with all of the developments and open funding opportunities associated with this legislation. And then finally, there's a survey that you're free to take regarding the infrastructure law and any plans your community has to access funds, and also to give us some feedback on today's event, if you loved it or if you hated it. So now we covered that, let's move on to the disclosure. So any county attorneys are going to love this. The descriptions provided in this presentation summarize certain provisions of the legislation, but are not exhaustive. They do not describe all terms and conditions associated with the use of bipartisan infrastructure law funds and do not describe all requirements that may apply to this funding. It's a massive piece of legislation. We have less than an hour to cover it, so we can't possibly So first up, we have the incomparable Jessica Jennings. She's a legislative director from the National Association of Counties, where she leads the Transportation Committee and the Rural Action Caucus. NACO is an incredible thought leader in this space as they carry out their mission to strengthen America's counties. They serve nearly 40,000 county elected officials and 3.6 million county employees, many of whom are on today's call. They advocate for county priorities and federal policymaking and enrich the public's understanding of county government. We're thrilled to partner with NACO on this event. Jessica, thank you for your time and welcome to the call.
Thank you, Tim. I'll take it from here. Yeah?
Oh no, I gotta introduce Aaron.
Oh, okay. Then just thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So next, our other presenter is the Beast in the East, Aaron Ford. He's Eagleview's Eastern Regional Vice President. Aaron and I are both proud to be with Eagleview, an industry leader offering aerial imagery, software, and analytics. Eagleview covers 94% of the U.S. population. We have over 1 billion images in our database, and we have former local government employees on staff. So folks that sit in your chair or have sat in your chair and deal with the issues that you do on a daily basis. The they're with us and they inform how we do what we do and how we do it every day. So Aaron, welcome to today's call.
Thanks, Tim. Very happy to be here. This is the fun part of the job when we get to talk to our customers and help show them ways to creatively fund projects that can help them do more with less. And that's what we're all about here. And Jessica is an industry expert, so we're very lucky to have her. So now, Jessica, take it away.
All right. And one more. I'm going to jump back in really quick and just go through the agenda. Sorry.
Hey.
I know I'm sick of me too.
We're all anxious to get away from Eagle View folks over to Jessica.
I know. I'm doing my best to get out of the way. And there's a lot we could talk about regarding this legislation, but we're going to focus on the following today. So first is just an overview, background, breakdown of the numbers, insights into why this is important for state and local governments, and then how bill compares to other federal laws like the American Rescue Plan. Then we'll get started sharing tips on how governments can monitor and access bill resources, and then a deep dive into an example of one program, the Safe Streets and Roads for All opportunity. Then we'll talk about the application process, including guidance on applying, what happens when you submit, as well as when funds are awarded and if they're not awarded, maybe what to do. Then we'll pivot to Eagle View solutions. The bill vision comes from the federal government that appropriates funds and makes them available through these programs. But it's really the state and local governments that will implement that vision, sometimes with the help of third parties from the private sector like Eagle View. And that's where we come in. We're excited to talk about how our solutions can support the planning, design, implementation, and maintenance of your infrastructure projects. I am done. We will move forward into the presentation. So Jessica, what is the bipartisan infrastructure law?
Thanks, Tim. Well, the bipartisan infrastructure law, to start out, is formerly known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It was signed into law by President Biden in November of 2021, and it is truly a historic investment in America's infrastructure. It authorized nearly $1 trillion over 5 years, annually FY22 through FY26, and that's for those traditional infrastructure sectors that you think of, like transportation, water, wastewater systems, broadband, energy, the energy grid, Western water infrastructure, and some resiliency improvements. And really what's important from this 1 trillion is 550 billion, because that number represents the new investments in the law. So a way to think of it is that, before we were already spending money, right, taking care of our roads, taking care of our bridges. So this calculates spending that same money, that baseline, and on top of that, it adds nearly $500 billion, or just over $500 billion. So looking at how that shakes out for the country so far, it has concluded with 185 billion in awards from the bipartisan infrastructure law for projects across the country, counties, cities, towns, states, all that good stuff. And this is actually almost 6 months old now, so this is even a little less than what that number would be right now. So talking about just what's in the law, there's more than just transportation, though. That is what I'm going to focus on today, because it does represent over half of that new spending that I just referenced. But in addition to transportation, there's also 55 billion for water through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, 65 billion for broadband through the U.S. Department of Commerce, 73 billion for energy and power upgrades through the Department of Energy, 21 billion for environmental remediation, also through the EPA, 8.3 billion for Western water infrastructure through the Department of the Interior and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and 46 billion through Homeland Security for resiliency improvements onto assets around the country. So just kind of a glimpse at what's inside. If you see that circle, you see that 51%, the blue there, is transportation. So like I said, certainly the bulk of the new investments.
Right. And so, Jessica, those tables that we referenced at the beginning of the call, all of the opportunities in that table are aligned with this breakdown, right?
Yes. So I'll just skip back because the table that you saw a glimpse of, which I hope you'll see much more of, outlines the programs across these federal agencies. It's not just transportation. There's over 100. I think it's maybe around up to 115. We also add new programs. In some cases, this law appropriated a lump sum of money and basically gave an agency a directive. And with that, the agency has stood up a program that didn't previously exist. So as those become open, or we realize they've been established, we also add those. So hopefully really helpful. But yes, this is where you'll find this funding in the opportunities for the law.
Great, thanks.
So looking just a little further at what's in the transportation funds, obviously that encompasses quite a bit of modes, and it truly is almost every mode of transportation. The only thing not listed here really is walking and biking, and there's funding in the law for that as well. Roads and bridges by far still are enjoying the most funding. That's $110 billion. Transit 39, rail 66 billion. I won't read all of these, but as you can see, it's everything from roads and bridges to public transit to heavy rail to transportation safety, airports, ports, and of course the electrification of the transportation sector, which the Biden administration is super eager to do, and obviously many others are as well. So why is this law so important to state and local governments? If you know anything about infrastructure, you know that it was a long time coming before we were able to actually pass this law. For a while, we were living off of extensions of previous laws, which is not good because it really does take away from the funding increases that we can enjoy when we get new reauthorizations. But why is this so important to us? It's because state and local governments generally own all of America's transportation infrastructure, to the tune of about 97%. So you see listed there 78%, that's just local governments. When you throw in state governments, it comes up to about 97. The federal government owns about 3%, and that's really just roads that are on public lands, so a lot of western places and also tribal lands. So together we own a lot, and counties on their own own quite a bit. Nearly half of all public road miles and 4 out of every 10 bridges are owned by counties and operated by counties. The bridges specifically, and also obviously really relative to this conversation for Eagle View, the bridges are typically those off the national highway system. So they are, can potentially seen years and years of underinvestment. So these are really critical connections. And, while they may not carry the volume of interstate bridges, they may serve as literally the only way in and out of a community. So really, really important that we keep these up and running. So anyway, with that said, the law obviously provides funding for state and local infrastructure, hence why it is important to us.
Well said.
Thanks. And just a couple of graphs. These really tell the story. You can see that by far state and locals outspend the federal government on infrastructure. And this is probably my favorite because it kind of goes across the infrastructure sectors and just shows you how much outspending that actually is. Highways, you can see, which is probably what most people think actually is what the federal government's taking care of. But in reality, they are sending that money down to state and local governments to do that. And this is just a quick little infographic of the county role in infrastructure. We're investing $134 billion a year in the construction of and maintenance and operation of America's infrastructure. Like I said, we own 38% of bridges, 45% of public roads, and we also support over a third of public airports and public transit systems. That basically means we have an authority or we sit on a board and have some sort of role in the administration of the system or airport. And obviously transit agencies are pretty unique because those are often run as a county-wide entity by counties. I think that might be the same one again, so we'll skip that. And again, this is just a breakdown of that $134 billion. It's not actually just roads and transportation counties are investing in. It's also the construction of public facilities like hospitals and jails, sewage and solid waste management. And obviously we also do fun things like we maintain parks and build recreational places for people to enjoy in the community. Also play a big role in broadband deployment, which remains at the forefront, obviously, of everyone's interest right now. Some counties remain completely unconnected, so this remains a huge priority for NACO as we continue to get funding from the infrastructure law. So Tim asked me to talk about this, and I do think it's important. I think sometimes maybe we forget that this is maybe not intuitive. So how is the infrastructure law different than the American Rescue Plan Act? First of all, I think ARPA might be the most well-known piece of legislation outside of Washington, D.C. By state and local governments to ever exist. Everyone seems familiar with it. And of course, that's because it sent about $65 billion down to the state and local level and $65.1 billion specifically to county governments. So how does this different? This does not, unfortunately, send you direct money, number one. There's different ways to access funds in the law, but the by far biggest opportunity for counties is competitively. So you must compete for the funds. Oftentimes you are competing against other counties, cities, towns, and for the most part, state governments as well. So it can be quite challenging. And the law also contains some traditional authorizations. Like I mentioned, we were already spending money to take care of our transportation system. That's an authorization of funding that happens every 5 years and generally has to keep happening to keep that money there and keep those systems running, or it has to be extended. Like I mentioned, we were living on some extensions prior to this law being passed. Like I said, biggest difference here is the money is not coming directly. It is not being allocated to you based on population, anything like that. It is a matter of competing almost entirely for the transportation funds in the law.
Yeah, thanks for covering that. I think that's something that we want folks attending today's call to sort of really grasp, is that the way those funds flow is just fundamentally different. ARPA, there's a lot of flexibility. It went right to an account that's controlled by the state and local governments so that they can internally allocate those funds. Infrastructure law is probably some more familiar to local government employees in the having to apply for the funding through those competitive opportunities. So thanks for covering that.
Yeah, and Tim, and I would also mention there's federal regulations that actually don't apply to the ARPA funds that do apply to the infrastructure funds, and that's really kind of been a deciding factor for some of our counties who've been trying to figure out, it's not often that we're kind of a wealth of riches, right? And which pot of money to use, but that has been a factor as we've talked about some infrastructure projects. So just want to mention that as well.
Yeah, and I think thanks for bringing that up. I also want to call out a study that NACO is part of with the National League of Cities and I think the Brookings Institute, maybe. They're monitoring a group of government entities and how they're spending their ARPA funds. And I think we anecdotally hear that there's an impression that ARPA funds have been spent and they're gone and they're no longer in play. And so, we can stop talking about ARPA funds. But that analysis showed that as of Monday, about 25% of ARPA funds remain unobligated. So they have not been contracted for, and they need to be contracted for by the end of 2024, or else I believe they risk forfeiture. So, as you're considering opportunities in your government, there are two avenues that you can explore for funding. ARPA is one of them, and it's very much still in play, I think is the takeaway that we're trying to communicate here. There's still funds available there. And then the infrastructure bill is a totally different avenue with a lot of funding associated there too, through the programs that we'll start to talk about now.
And Tim, I'm so glad you mentioned that. And if I actually could just make a legislative push for 1 second, speaking about those unobligated ARPA funds, the U.S. House of Representatives has introduced legislation literally like while we were on this webinar to claw back some unobligated ARPA funds, including state and local funds. So again, I can't stress, and obviously this is a message for our county commissioners and our elected officials, which we have sounded the alarms. But just so you know as well, there are actually efforts in Congress to claw back some of those funds. So again, the need to obligate them is obviously there while still being prudent as possible.
Sure. So,
but it seemed like a very timely update, so I would be remiss not to mention that.
I'm glad you did. That's wild that occurred right now, but I think we're collectively trying to create a sense of urgency to make sure that those funds don't fall through the cracks and go unspent, as opposed to making a difference in your communities.
Exactly. So, okay, getting started. So how do you access the funds in the infrastructure law? I mentioned competitively, and like I said, by far that's going to be the biggest way that a county or a local government is going to access the transportation funds. And that's because 90% of transportation funds go directly to state DOTs via formulas, which is what you see next there, formulas. Those are not actually highway formulas because we don't get any of that money directly. But other federal formulas dictate other federal funding, like airport grants and transit formula grants. These are not the only sources of funding for those, but it's just another example of a way that the infrastructure law distributes these funds. The formulas suballocate some funding. In some cases, it's really not a major source of funding. And then, of course, there's money to finance in the law as well. Just, I would almost say forget about the rest of the stuff and just look at the competitive grants. And that's really what that table is that Tim showed at the beginning. Those are the grants that you're going to compete for. Almost some of them are formula, but there's a column that tells you what type of funding each one is, so you can distinguish between the two. So for the law, just to put in perspective, over 5 years, just the DOT alone makes $100 billion available to state and local governments through competitive grant programs. And then some of those formulas, which I don't know if you can see this very well, we'll be sure to distribute these, but through some formula programs that the law created, of course, those are really going to states. And I just mentioned this, 90% of the federal highway funds do go straight to state DOTs via formulas. Counties do not get their hands on that ever, even if the funding is suballocated based on population where you live. It's only going to be suballocated to a planning organization. Of course, counties and cities and townships make up those, but it's never direct to the county, again, like the distinction with ARPA funds.
Jessica, if I could ask you one
Yes.
quick question. When
Really?
my customers hear competitive grant, the antenna automatically goes up that maybe it's a low percentage of folks that actually get these grants when they go after it. Would it be fair to say that there is a high percentage of award for those that go after these grants?
I think that really I think that's a great question. And I think that really varies by grant, right? So how competitive is that grant program? If the grant program has, 25 flexibilities under it and it's the biggest, you could do almost anything with it. There's a program that comes to my mind. It's called Raise Grants. You can do everything from installing wildlife crossings to doing a surface transportation project at an airport to fixing a culvert. Those are very competitive and they're overly subscribed. But the program that we're actually going to look at today, the Safe Streets, every single complete application that applied for this certain subgrant was awarded. And that is how much, it's hard to answer that question because that's how much it can differ between programs of different types. I think you could probably look at programs and find the rate of award, but it'd be hard to say just kind of blanket how it would work. But I definitely think, there's a lot of other requirements in here. There's, in many of these opportunities, there's rural set-asides. You have to spend money in a rural area. There's requirements that kind of guide the funds to priorities of the agency. So it's nuanced the further you go into the notice of funding, essentially.
Great, thanks.
And just to finish this out, most of these programs that are competitive, you can apply directly to the federal government. You are not applying to the state government. DOT in every case, you are applying to US DOT, not your state DOT and not any other entity. That's not true for all the funds in the law, but for the most part, it is. So how can I navigate, the law, right? We've talked about it. We've talked about the table. That's what Tim put up. We've talked about the open notices page. Those go up every time one opens, and then they will automatically go away once they're closed. From that page, you can click directly to the actual federal government's notice of funding, which will guide you through the application process, and outline all the needs that that the application requires you to fulfill. In addition, I would check out our other resources. We have a legislative analysis that takes a much deeper look into what those programs do and how they're funded, and some other kind of niche things. And then the federal government just really has put out so many resources for this law. I've included DOTs and White Houses, but every agency funded in the law has their own landing page. They have their own guidance. They have technical assistance resources available. So if you feel overwhelmed, you feel like your county or, town, city is not equipped, to deal with kind of what seems like complex information, check out some of these technical assistance resources, because they really lay out how to go through these applications from start to finish. And of course, it's a time investment, and of course, it's a staff investment. And we certainly understand the constraints on that. But at the same time, they are out there for you to explore. So I would certainly encourage that. So what is a notice of federal funding? So this is how the federal government lets you know that funding is available. We're going to look at an example of one in just a moment. But yeah, essentially it allows, it outlines the program name, program funding level, the description, who's eligible, the deadline, etc. And this is essentially what that looks like. You can find these on grants.gov. It has all funding notices across the federal government, not just the infrastructure law, but literally every single one. It can be quite overwhelming, but it has some criteria over on the left side of the screen. You can click to, do you want just USDOT? Do you want just county governments are eligible? So it's a pretty cool tool to, narrow down what you're looking for. But this is the Safe Streets and Roads for All funding opportunity through the Department of Transportation. It is open right now through July 10th, and it has about $1.2 billion available. So I think we're going to go through this. So here's a NOFO. Here's the overview, essentially. That fun little dino that my Google Chrome creates every time I download a QR code. That's not me doing graphic design. That just kind of happens. So if you scan that, it'll take you directly to the notice of funding, where you can read the full thing yourself. It's actually pretty plain speak and pretty straightforward written. I mean, they do want you to win these awards. So it is not like legislative text or anything like that, or US code or anything like that. So encourage you to check it out, because it really is straightforward. Like I said, about $1.2 billion available through July the 10th.
One question, Jessica.
Yes.
If
sure.
This goes through July 10th, do you have any idea how long it would take for applicants to find out if they were approved or not?
Yeah, Tim and I talked about this, and I said I would say somewhere between 3 and 6 months. Some programs, again, it goes back to what I mentioned before, Aaron, if there's a lot of applicants, it's going to take longer for them to give you an award. There's some programs they have to announce an award within like a certain time frame, statutorily required. But anywhere between 3 and 6 months is probably a good timeline to think about as far as federal funding goes.
Right. Okay.
This program is particularly interesting for local governments, because only local governments, metropolitan planning organizations, and tribes are eligible. If you are familiar with transportation funding, you know that states, like I said, get all the money and then they're eligible for everything else. It's really unfair, but of course there are partners, but they do have quite the first bite at the apple and certainly the biggest. So this program is over $1 billion. States are not eligible, and certainly encourage anybody interested in improving road safety to apply for this grant. I think that's just a bigger, oh, I'm not sure if I switched. Oh, no, I hit something else. Sorry about that. And then this is just the kind of information you can honestly find on our table, right? And this is also the information you can find in the NOFO. So who's eligible? What are the award, floors and ceilings? What's the federal cost share? I know, Aaron, we were talking about the federal cost sharing before this. Traditionally, the DOT funds through federal highways are going to have an 80% federal share and a 20% local match requirement. But important to note that all projects are reimbursable. So it must be financed locally up front and then can be reimbursed once a grant agreement is executed. And I can talk more about that in the post-award slide that we have in just a moment. But again, here's the eligible projects, special considerations. Some of these programs have special requirements, like a county's eligible, but the county must be 200,000 and outside of an urbanized area, right? So that actually puts out a lot of counties out of contention. So really important to just kind of look through these and find some top level information that will let you know pretty much straight away if this opportunity is right for you.
Hey, Jessica, going back to the previous slide, there's a few items on that I'd like to just ask about. First of all, the cost share. Is that 80-20 traditionally the breakdown that we would see with these types of funding opportunities, or is that different within this legislation?
It is very specific to USDOT, and it is different throughout the agencies other than this, but Federal Highway Administration funds specifically are typically 80-20.
Great, thanks. And then all of these notices will have a minimum and maximum award. The minimum award, let's say in this case it's $100,000, but let's say it was $1 million for another program. I believe the Port Infrastructure Program, that's a current open funding notice, has an award or a minimum award floor of $1 million. If a county or any government were awarded that opportunity, that $1 million does not have to be used with one entity, right? So for example, if Eagleview was interested in supporting a port infrastructure project, and one of our clients who was awarded a $1 million grant, they don't have to spend the entire $1 million with us. Obviously, we would love for that to happen, but it can be spread out among different. I believe you use maybe the cost can be shared among a lot of different parties. Yeah.
That's right, and they have a section in the NOFO that outlines eligible costs in addition to eligible projects, and so it would just be, simply a cost within the project budget. It wouldn't be the whole project budget, right?
Perfect. Thank you.
And I would also just mention some don't have minimum and maximums. Most of them do, but not all of them.
Oh, great. Thanks.
And so applying for funds. So what goes into an application? Well, it can be quite, time consuming. And first of all, there's some standard forms that go into all of, again, I'm speaking very specifically to DOT, that go into the transportation applications. And they're basically those, the top, I think that's 7, which is just your standard form application for federal assistance. That's standard across the government, hence why it's called standard form. Then disclosing any lobbying that you may have consulted with or contracted with, project summary, and then some other budget information. You only have to do one of the two. You either have construction or you have non-construction, and you fill out the forms accordingly. And I highlighted the project narrative because the project narrative is really when it's your opportunity to explain why this project is a project that should be funded by the government, right? This is your chance to tell them, like, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm improving, here's why it helps, and here's how it meets the goals you've laid out in your application very clearly. I mean, would go so far as to say, you can look in their application, you can see their considerations and go one by one to make sure that you have addressed not only the statutory goals that have to be included in the program, but also the goals that the agency has set for that particular program. And there will always be, 2 sets, maybe even more than that, of criteria that they will rate your application on. But the project narrative is really your part to, get creative and, make your case. So I wanted to highlight that.
Sure, but it sounds like the point you're making is whatever is important for the agency or the opportunity, make sure that that's reflected in your application narrative.
That's right. And I think we have a slide in just a moment that talks about how, how obvious that was in this actual program when they funded it in FY22. If not, I'll mention it. So what happens once you submit that application? Once you have a complete application, it goes to a technical review team at USDOT. They assign it a rating, so low, medium, and high, with some nuances in there. The Federal Highway Administration Senior Review Team then identifies which projects should move forward to the Federal Highways Administrator for consideration. Once that happens, the Administrator of Federal Highways decides which application should move forward to the Secretary, and ultimately the Secretary makes the final award selections. So what happens if you're unsuccessful? The first thing I included, of course, is try again. This law, again, differs from ARPA in the fact that it's a 5-year law, right? So almost every program is funded for 5 years, and under DOT, I think that's certainly true. Each one is through FY26, so you have an opportunity to apply again. And while there are changes from year to year, they're very good about telling you exactly what's changed. So I mean, once you've applied once, you're way ahead of the process if you are unsuccessful. There are some examples of programs at DOT where your application for one program is unsuccessful but highly rated, and they actually fast track it through another program to ensure that it's funded through a program with more money, is really, I think, what the goal, well, at least what happened there. And then DOT will also, in many cases, give you direct feedback on unsuccessful applications. That's helpful, but it's costly to apply, can be costly to apply for a competitive grant. So you can't just be spending that money, to get feedback, ultimately to be unsuccessful. I think a lot of times what we see in DC is federal consultants are really helpful, as long as they're the good ones that know what they're doing, in kind of navigating this world, because it can be kind of complex. But, we've seen communities of all sizes have success with infrastructure law funds.
Jessica, are you aware of any resources besides maybe professional services that are available for folks in local governments to take advantage of? I know NACO has a lot, but are you aware of anything that maybe the National League of Cities has, or anything that anyone at the Transportation Committee has mentioned?
There is, I know that NLC has partnered with Bloomberg, and they have a local infrastructure advocacy, like kind of technical assistance thing. Thing is not the best word to use, but thing going on. And like that, there are technical assistance centers around the country. If you actually looked into it right now, I think it's called Thriving Communities, and it's really an initiative that has taken hold at USDOT, I believe also at the Housing and Urban Development, and potentially some other places. But they're creating these technical assistance centers that people can go to, and also keep in mind, your federal highway, they're not just here. There's regional offices, there's local contacts, where really these conversations should be starting oftentimes, or they can really be helpful. So that's probably an important point to make in itself, is that they're not so removed up here. These folks are around locally as well to help you and to communicate, what your issues are up the chain.
Right. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem. So what happens, this is more optimistic slide. So what happens if an award is made? That grant funding obligation occurs when the selected applicant and USDOT enter into a grant agreement. This is what I was talking about with the reimbursement. So these grant funds, it says SS4A, but it's any of the grant funds will be reimbursed only after a grant agreement has been executed and allowable expenses incurred and valid requests for reimbursement submitted. Allowable expenses are outlined very clearly in the notice of funding. Like I said, talked about the eligible costs. These funds in particular have to be spent within 5 years after the grant agreement is executed and the USDOT is obligated the funds. And then just in general to think about, I may have made competing sound scary and daunting, and I think sometimes it can be, but it's not doable. However, it's important to keep in mind that even if you get the award, there is a significant amount of work in the post-award process, which essentially is you complying with federal requirements and you reporting on those requirements so they know that you are complying up until the date that the federal government tells you the grant is over. So something to think about that also takes staff capacity and staff knowledge, et cetera.
So Jessica, one thing with ARPA funds that we're aware of is that you could use ARPA funds to hire professional services or consulting services to help with that reporting. Is that the same with infrastructure funds?
No, not that I'm aware of. In any of these cases, could you use money to hire a consultant?
Bummer. Sorry.
We would say the same. I mean, I think, while that can open up, sort of opens the door for maybe some misuse of funds, unfortunately, by the few bad apples out there. But, we really think that local governments would benefit a lot from funds to say, hire full-time employees or build staff capacity at the local level so that we are equipped to compete when these opportunities do come out. And these are things, that we are advocating for every day. So.
Yeah.
Did you want me to talk more about this, Tim? I think I mentioned what else is in the law.
Yeah. I mean,
basically
we covered a lot of, our focus today was on transportation because that's where most of the funds are coming through DOT, but just wanted to acknowledge that there are funds that are also flowing through these other departments and agencies. And if you have opportunities aligned with these, the similar process or the same process that we walked through would apply to all the opportunities available through these. Is that accurate?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, then, so we've covered what the law is, the funds that are available, how to monitor those funds, how to sort of stay up on what notices are open, how to figure out whether or not you have an opportunity that is eligible for those funds. And now I think we want to pivot to maybe talking about how EagleView can be a part of this, right? So EagleView, well, I'll just kick it to Aaron here. EagleView, if there's an opportunity to partner on the implementation of any of these opportunities, we'd love to support you in those efforts. So Aaron, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And thanks, Jessica. I think that was some great information. And one last quick question for you, Jessica, before I talk a little bit about EagleView is, are you going to be talking about this subject in person anywhere in the next, maybe, I don't know, week or so? And if so, where?
Aaron, how did you know? So sorry, we're remiss not to have mentioned that I will be at the Future View conference next Tuesday, April 25th, and we'll have a couple of these sessions in person. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for the reminder.
Absolutely. So for any of you out there on the call today listening, if you're going to be in San Antonio with us for our national conference, please stop by and see Jessica and learn more and get your questions answered. There's a lot of things that I can say, of course, about EagleView. I've been with this great company now for over 18 years, and I've done a lot of different things. I've managed our West Coast sales team for many years, and now I'm fortunate enough to run our East Coast sales team. And I think the best thing about EagleView is we have over 34 direct representatives, both salespeople and technical support folks in the field, designed to build relationships with local government and understand your needs and treat you as our customer, which you are. We learn what's important to you. We don't just sell out of the box solutions. We very much customize our offerings. And we look for ways to help our customers then fund these projects. And this is just one of the ways that I think is, very timely, that you can go after now and seek funds to help projects that can make a difference in your community today. So for those 34 sales reps and technical reps that are out there, they're there to help you. So like Tim said at the beginning of the call, if you would like for one of us to reach out to you and talk more directly to your county, or even come out to your county or city or state and talk more about these products and solutions and funding opportunities, please put your information in. Send us an email. Send us put your information in the chat. We're happy to follow up and spend time talking specifically about your county. But just a couple of things and a couple of ways that I see the oblique imagery from EagleView fitting in with this infrastructure bill, is with asset management and public works. And a lot of our counties, the public works departments leverage our imagery to do asset inventory. They use the high resolution imagery. It's not just straight down overhead imagery, but it's from multiple angles. So for those of you that are our current customers, you know what I'm talking about. But if not, I'm happy to set up a demonstration for you. But you're able to see all multiple angles, zoom in, and see grading condition of roads and different assets. So asset management life cycle is a key component of what we do here at EagleView. Taking a look at sites for development, and got a little bit of a slide transition issue there. My apologies, but you go here.
This is I just want to apologize to everybody on the call. This is my fault. Aaron's in a pinch here. These are auto sort of flying by, so we'll have to return to each one of them to spend a second talking to them. But sorry about that, Aaron.
Oh yeah, no worries. Just seeing how you handle things in a live demonstration is not a problem. But this, some examples are, taking a look at project locations, site, and I apologize for just jumping around, but taking a look at your locations at your desktop. That really is what we're all about, is looking and making decisions about projects and about things in your jurisdiction at your desktop, saving time, not having to get in the car and go across counties, across cities, into unsafe environments, into environments that you're not familiar with, that are costly. We deal a lot with our tax departments in our counties, and the biggest cost savings for them is not having to put their appraiser in the car, drive across county, get locked out from a property, spend a whole day coming back not getting anything done. So it's being productive at your desktop. This is the same thing. When you're talking about public works, asset inventory, it's about making decisions at your desktop. And it's important to note, as you see here, and thanks to Tim, this is my favorite football stadium in the country here. This is my Charlotte local stadium, the Carolina Panthers. So if anybody knows me, that's why Tim put this in the demonstration for us. But to make the point that we're not just pretty pictures. Pretty pictures have been around forever, and anybody can provide them to you. But what makes EagleView so special is the fact every single pixel in that image that you're looking at is georeferenced to the ground, and it has an XY coordinate associated to it. And there is a mathematical algorithm across every pixel that allows you to accurately measure anything in that image, whether it be a height, an area, a distance, a slope, even anything of that nature. That is what you're able to do. So you're able to do a site inventory, a site assessment at your desktop. We even have solutions that are brand new this year And if you've not heard about it, please reach out to your district manager or let us know that you would like a solution or a demonstration. We actually have a program within our cloud solution to get frequent ortho imagery captured at an incredibly affordable cost. So you're able to get images. We have customers flying 3 times a year to keep up with impervious surface change, things of that nature, which we're happy to discuss how that could fit into these grant applications as well. All right, so that is kind of my spiel there. As you can see with this high resolution imagery, that you can see lots of different information. You can see the grade and condition of the pavement. You can see details and wordings on the side of buildings there. You see that Northern Indiana Public Service Company. And Tim, I don't know how to make this stop, man. There you go. And there's an example of measuring heights. This is actually a bridge right near that Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte. You can get a very good view that you would not be able to see from a straight down orthogonal image, right? You're able to hear, in this instance, see the side of this highway and measure the distance from the top down to the ground and make decisions based on that. So it's a unique technology that fits right in with infrastructure. I've talked a little bit about why, but some key points here. Why Eagle View? You know, the clear, detailed imagery. You can get down to 1-inch resolution imagery now that'll just blow your socks off. It's just really incredible stuff. You can get 3-dimensional views. We even have 3D capabilities where you can take these images, bring it into a 3D environment, and do things that you can only do with 3D. We also have a very easy to use software, and we integrate with popular applications. I know one of the biggest hesitancies that all of the prospects I've ever spoken to have is, oh gosh, do I have to learn a new software application, manage something new and something different? That's why Eagle View is so special in our partnership network, that we really put a focus on integrations. That's why we're a very tight partner with CityWorks, ViewWorks, Skyline for 3D, and then of course Esri we're always developing with and moving to deeper integrations with them with the web app builder widgets and ArcGIS Pro. So if you would like to see more about that, again, just reach out to us. We're happy to come out even on site and work with you to answer your questions. I do want to say thank you, especially to Tim. Tim did a lot of work pulling all this information together, making everything happen here. And Jessica, we could not have done this without you, the industry expert helping us here. Tim and others in our company are happy to get on the phone with you and help you get through this process, figuring out who in your county should actually be making these grant applications, and how Eagle View fits in is not the only request, but fits in with the other requests that you may have. So lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for taking your time out of your busy day to be a part of this.
Great. Yep. Thanks, Aaron. We'll open it up to Q&A now. We've been monitoring the inbox throughout and have tried to answer live. One question we got, will you email these slides out? Jessica, are you comfortable with your slides being shared with anyone who requests?
Of course, that's the number one question I get.
Might have to start leading with that.
But also, Tim, if I could just make one, just from a question in the chat, just make one clarification. The Safe Streets and Roads for All program has 2 subgrants beneath it. And I mentioned that one was funded entirely for all the applications. And that was true of one subgrant and not true of the other subgrant. So I just want to clarify that.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, if you have a question, please submit it. In the meantime, I think one of the takeaways that we would like to impart to the group here is that we recognize that it takes a lot of effort to complete one of these applications, but I think we all agree that the potential is worth it on account of the funding that's available that can have a transformative change on your local community, which can last, the impact of which can last decades. So I think, a short-term inconvenience or just a heavy lift for decades of community improvement. And it looks like we may have had a question come in. All right. Jessica, I don't know if you can see this one as well. Is there money for remonumenting the public land survey system?
While there is money for public lands, I don't think that's an explicit use, but I'm happy to double check and can follow up with you.
Great, thanks. All right. And I think maybe just another point before we log off here is that a way, because we showed those tables at the outset, and I hope everybody opened those up. It's a lot of information, right? It's a lot to keep up with. So how do you even get started? Jessica, you did a great job covering a lot of that, but a way to think about this or frame that thinking is, what are you trying to do, right? What are we trying to do in our communities? What's our need? Start from there and then map your need to one of the programs that supports that need or provides funding for that. It does take a little bit of work to sort of read through all of the programs, and you don't really have to go through all of them. I think, Jessica, a point you're making is maybe you just sort by the competitive grants, start with that, and then find something that's aligned with your goal, and then monitor that and see when the funding notice opens, get an application in, and then if you're unfortunately unsuccessful, Jessica, you made a great point that you're already ahead of the curve next year when that program opens up again, either in its previous form or with a slight modification.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. And I think, if you have a water project, you don't have to sift through DOT opportunities, things like that. So you can narrow it down probably quicker than you think, if you just know what you need. So, but thanks again for having me. This has been great.
Yeah, and one final thing. So you lead the NACO's transportation committee. There are representatives from across the country, different counties on there. Can you provide maybe some insight into conversations going on in that committee about this legislation? Sort of, what are they seeing? How are they feeling about it? What's going on?
Sure. I think everyone is in probably the same boat to a lot of our audience here. They are trying to determine how they can best access the resources in the law. As I said, we continue to see more programs, more opportunities roll out every year. Some programs did not come about until FY23. So it's kind of a revolving door right now of opportunities. And as you can imagine, with the Transportation Committee, we're looking at those across the gamut. So it can be quite overwhelming, and hence why NACO's put out these resources, and hopefully they are helpful and useful to those who are attempting to navigate what I think ended up being about 1,700 pages of a law.
Some light reading.
It was.
All right. Well, we're at time. There are no more questions in the inbox. So we'll just say thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Jessica and Aaron, for your subject matter expertise. And we'll see everyone at the next installment of one of these, whenever that is. But we're looking forward to keeping these going. So thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.